These fucking motherfuckers come from Europe and then they come to America. These sons of bitches, and they write all this stuff down, and that's what we have to go off of now, right? Uh, yeah, they said a lot of the natives were naked when they first got here. Why the fuck were they naked? I mean, were they really naked? I mean, there's different texts and memoirs, notes and shit like that where they say some people have clothes and some people don't, depending on age and gender, right? But why the fuck were they naked? Clothes have been around. People have been wearing clothes for fucking thousands of years. I think there's some people in the Paleolithic times that had clothes. Clothes has been around for many, many, many years. And so why were these people naked? Why do you wear clothes? I guess a lot of Mexican people that I know, they wear a lot of clothes, like long sleeve shirts and long pants and stuff like that when they want to block their skin from the sun, right? And then there's other people that wear clothes to hide their skin from the cold, right? And so why were these people naked? I mean, and then there's clothes that's so you don't get bit by bugs and you don't have to sit down naked on a rock, right? So, I mean, were they really naked? And if they were, why would the Europeans have a problem with it? Yeah, they were Christians, but were they really fucking that cool, right? They did some crazy shit. We're going to get into that. But but if I came to an island and a bunch of fucking women and people were naked, I'd probably get naked too. I mean, just imagine coming around an island with bunch of naked, 1,000 naked people, and you got clothes on. You'd feel like an idiot. These guys felt like idiots, so they wrote it down like everybody else was the problem. Isn't that usually how society works, right? Everybody else is the problem except for me. That's right. I have all the answers in the world. Got it wrong, motherfuckers. You see, back in those days, things were probably a lot different than they are now. I mean, in America, people sleep around, they're called a tramp or a slut or something like that, right? Well, they didn't probably have those types of terms on those islands at that time. So if the Europeans wrote that these people were part of a free love society where everybody just had sex with each other and there was no jealousy because nobody owned anybody, if it was a free love society like the Christians say, then what the fuck was the problem, right? Maybe they just said that and it wasn't true. But anyways, that's all we got right now. What we have is those memoirs. And if the women had children, the children would live with the women because wouldn't know who the father was. So that's what's written, at least, right? So it doesn't make a lot of sense. So there might have been a lot of bias written in there, But humans do what humans do. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, that's just what they do. Humans been stealing women from other cultures and other places. It's just the way it is. I mean, if back then they didn't care about gender, right? Why would they only steal women? Why wouldn't they steal men too? They're like, well, one hole's the same as another hole. That's fucking disgusting. All right, but yeah, it's just interesting the perception of these Europeans or these Christians when they first came to the American islands. Their first days and years there, how they wrote about them. There was a lot of writings that said that these people were naked as the day they were born, except some of them had clothes on. So it's like, okay. But then these fucking Europeans, these guys were stuck on a boat for a really long time, and then they're hanging out with a bunch of fucking dudes on this boat, and then they show up to an island where a bunch of people are naked. What do you think they're gonna think? What do you think the average person thinks at that time? And from the last episode, we ended with the Europeans talking to the women that they took from the islands and they took on board. And the women, the Taino women, were describing the difference between them and the Carib women or the Carib people, right? And so they know the difference and they treated them accordingly, right? It doesn't go very specific at that moment how they did or what they said or did to them. But Dr. Chanca did write that the Carib Indians seemed cruel and beastly, and that might have been his Christian bias writing his perspective, right? I mean, he doesn't get very specific into that. He does mention, though, that they were very kind and friendly to one another, but they were fierce and angry and rude to other people of other tribes and outside their group. He mentions, and he's not very specific about that. You can only imagine. But this is coming from a people from a different time, different place, different culture. And so we can't probably really understand. I mean, we could say, well, we're all humans, so we understand that guys like women and we need food and we need shelter and stuff like that. But they had just a different way about them. So, I mean, normally here in Chicago, we don't eat people, right? And so they were eating people. And we don't necessarily steal women either, right? We don't go to like big places and take all the women and kill the men. It just doesn't happen around here, even though there's a lot of different cultures around. But I digress. So Chanca writes about its second island. He says that I guess he was writing it at some point when he was back in a second island or some shit like that. But he said that that the people there were more industrious and they were better at building their houses and shit like that. And he said that on one of the islands that they seen a pot with a neck in there, a human neck. They were cooking up neck, right? So he says. And it's like, man, so this is really a different kind of people, they had a different mind. So I assume like hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was probably more common that when people went hunting for deer and buffalo or whatever, and they couldn't find any, and they seen some dude walking down the road, and they're like, well, there's some food there, and they ate them. I'm sure that happened more. It was more likely in the past, especially if a people lived out in the middle of the woods or the middle of a desert or something like that, and they didn't have food for a long time, and they seen some stranger walking, they're like, well, there's food, there's dinner. And then in some other point of history, they're like, well, we better stop eating humans. And maybe it came with religion and all that. When they started making up religions, they probably put a different idea in people's heads, like, hey, that's not a good idea. It's like, maybe we could, make a farm here and then raise some cattle and stop eating our neighbors. But anyways, these people didn't have any clothes and they were eating their neighbors. And so they had neck stew, right? So Chanca says they had a pot of with a neck in there. They were cooking up. I'm sure they ate other parts of the body, but they probably had like a recipe for the neck. Huh? Pretty crazy. Can you imagine that? So you can't really put yourself in that time because it was a different time. It was a different perspective. People have seen things differently and understood things differently. I mean, we could say, like, right now, if I took a boat across Chicago, Lake Michigan, and came to the other side of the water, and I saw some naked people there, and I was like, wow, I want to get to know these girls. And I came off the boat and found a bunch of body parts being cooked up and some of them eaten. I'd be like, man, I don't know if I want to get to know these women anymore. So it's very strange, to try to understand what was going through their mind at the time, or the fucking shit that they wrote down. But why would so many different people write about this same shit? It's just different culture and it's a different mindset, right? And we'll never really understand how, those people were at the time. Or how humans regarded, human life back then either, right? What's interesting is Chanca said that the Caribs would castrate young boys and then make them slaves until they grew up and then had a feast and ate them, right? Another interesting thing is, at that same time, there was another culture of people doing something similar to that in the African region. Well, Middle East and into Europe, right? The Muslims. But the Christians were doing it prior to that too, right? The Byzantine. So it wasn't like unheard of. It wasn't a surprise. Isn't that fucking interesting? Just imagine BLM recruiting people of a different race or a culture and castrating them. You'd be like, what the fuck is going on? This is crazy. And this is coming from all the people that I said that they collected on the last episode, which was the 20 or so women. And then, like I said, that that dude that got lost in the woods, and then he showed up 4 days later, came back with 10 people. I think they were mostly women and children. I think the majority of everybody that they took at that time that were supposedly captives of the Carib were women and children, because they said that the men had taken off in 10 canoes to raid another island at the time, besides those other 2 men that I mentioned, that when they first came and tried to persuade them come to the boat, they said no, and so they took 2 of them. So yeah, so these are the people that they got a lot of the information from. There was one time they came to an island, and Columbus sent like 25 guys to go gather some people for interview and for slavery or whatever else they were doing at the time. It's not very specific. It says just they went. Columbus sent 25 guys to the island to talk to the people. And when they were coming back on their boat at this particular island, some other people came along the shoreline on the other side, and they seen it was a log boat with 4 male Indians, 2 women, and a child, if I'm not mistaken. And they sat there for these Indians sat there for like an hour or 2 or something, just staring at the boat or at the ship of the Christians. They're like, "What the fuck is that thing, man? That is the weirdest looking thing I ever seen." They just stared at it. And in that time, Columbus had other people drive around from behind those people, so they wouldn't scare them. And so because they had bows and arrows and spears and shit like that. And so the Christians came from behind, and then the Indians are like, "Oh, we see you, motherfucker." And so they shot arrows at him, shooting one Christian a couple times in the chest with arrows and a spear into another one. Yeah, so there was a little bit of scuffle there, and then I think one of those Indians got away, swam away, and they captured the rest of the people there and brought them onto the boat. Pretty crazy fucking times. Yeah, so now there's blood and craziness going on. And since they had mostly women that they were taking because that's who they could capture, and the Europeans or the Christians, when they got there, a lot of the men had ran off, and a lot of the women supposedly were prisoners, and so they weren't able to get away so easily. They're like, screw our belongings, and the women were the belongings supposedly to the Carib, right? And so the Christians ended up having a lot of women on. And there was this dude named, this Italian guy, named, I think his name is Michel with a C at the end, so Michel de Cuneo, Cuneo. And this Cuneo guy, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Maybe it's Cuneo. This Cuneo guy somehow talked to Columbus about getting one of those Carib women to his cabin. He's like, "Hey, dude," I was like, we could tell the difference between the Taino, which are our friends, and the Carib, which are the enemies of us and our friends. Let me take one of those women into my cabin. He's like, "Do it, man." Columbus is like, "Have at it." So the dude took one of these women into the cabin, and it's written down. He wrote in his memoirs about it. It's pretty descriptive, or not very descriptive, right? It's not like you're reading porn or nothing like that. But he brought this Carib woman into his cabin, and he's like, "Hey, come on, let's do it," And she's like, "No." Then he tried forcing himself on her, and then she scratched the shit out of him until he was bleeding and screaming. And it's like, what the hell's going on? And at that moment, he didn't want it. He's like, "Man, I changed my mind about having sex with this girl because she scratched the shit out of me and I'm in pain." So the story goes, right? And then he goes out and he gets like some kind of rope or something. Then he whipped with it, and he's like whipping her, and she's screaming at the top of her lungs now. And until she's like, "Well, the only way I could stop this dude from whipping me is if I give him what he wants." And then I guess they had sex. And Cuneo was like, "Hey, she started schooling me." So yeah, so there's instances like that. And Cuneo is just one of the guys. Not everybody was writing shit down. So just imagine how many other dudes were doing about the same thing with all the people that they're gathering at that time, right? All the women, right? That's what people do. They still do it to this day. They're doing it to, women in Gaza right now. That's what humans do. Humans are piece of shit motherfuckers, right? Although I heard some rumors about the Muslims that were taking over women in Gaza, the Jewish women or whatever women that they captured, and they would have sex with them and then kill them. I heard that might be a rumor. So I don't think the Christians were killing these women after they had sex. I don't know. Maybe they did. But that's the kind of shit that was going on at that time. It's fucking wild. And then how many of these women ended up pregnant or having kids by these guys? We don't know. Not right now. And a lot of them went back to Europe. Raping, killing, conquering, it should never be allowed for any reason. But some people say, well, it was just those times. Yeah, all the fucking harems of all the women that they were stealing at that time. No, nobody gets a pass for that shit, man. Especially if the culture's still doing that to this day. I guess the more rationally minded people would be like, well, yeah, the Muslims are doing it, the Christians were doing it, the Spanish were doing it, the Italian were doing it, the Africans were doing it. I guess like it all boils down to all humans are fucking motherfuckers. That's right. All humans are motherfuckers. But nowadays people want to be tribal and they're like, well, he's on my side, so it's not that bad. They deserve it, right? It's like, come on, motherfucker. Nobody deserves that shit. So we have evidence in writing of this guy doing this particular thing, right? And we'll believe this thing that he said, but not some of the other stuff, because that's what we want to do. We want to pick out the shit that we want to believe and not the other stuff like the neck bone or the neck stew, right? So, yeah. We have evidence of this kind of stuff happening with some of the people. Well, one of the guys at least, and I'm sure it wasn't just one guy. If there was all those women, and then the Christians there that were had these women on there that they were trying to communicate with, I'm sure there was a lot more going on. But that was a Carib woman, and she had the cloth around her knee, and then the cloth around her ankle. Right, that's how they were able to tell apart the Taino and the Carib, right? And so he had a Carib woman with him. So it's not very specific of, at that point, how many of the women that they had were Carib. But they did have some, right? Although, see, in today's perspective, they say that there was a lot, since now that people are getting more freedom, there's a lot more cross-dressers and gay people coming out of the closet now, right? So maybe at this time, when Columbus brought all these people there might have been a group of people on his ship that were cross-dressers or gay people that didn't want to sleep with these women. And then there was other people that were, really Christian and followed the rules of Christianity and didn't want to sleep with these women. So I'm sure not everybody did it, but it was happening. And it's just interesting to see this part of history and the shit that was going on at that time, right? See, a lot of these memoirs aren't written down like storybooks where every situation and person gets very detailed, written down in detail. It's just like, it's vague, right? He says, yeah, this guy took the girl to the cabin. Well, that was specific. But we don't know what was happening with the other people. We have to consider presentism. We can't analyze what things were going on back then. In a human way, we can. Like, yeah, I mean, you should never kill people or conquer people, right? But at that time, that's what everybody was doing. So, is it justified? Like here in America or in Canada or United States, and there's a lot of places where you get in trouble for things that you say. You get fined or jailed for speaking about different things. And for example, that one guy got arrested for his speaking against the people that wanted to give a sex change to his son or daughter or whatever it was in Canada. I think he got arrested for that. Then there was another guy that was speaking out against his daughter being raped in that Virginia school. I forget the name of it, a couple years ago, and at high school, I think it was. And he went to the school and he's like, hey, what the fuck happened? And they arrested that guy. So a lot of times the things that you say could get you arrested, right? And in early United States, well, early America, colonization, people were burned, right, at the stake or hung or arrested, or they were publicly shamed, right, for saying the wrong thing or dressed the wrong way. So rules and laws change, by the decade or by the century or by the culture. And so we can't really look at the old days from 500 years ago and say, well, those guys were fucking assholes for what they did, as far as taking over, conquering lands and bringing their culture and putting their culture on a people. Right now, a lot of people are coming and invading the United States, not just Mexican people, but a lot of other cultures and states, nationalities. And a lot of people can justify it and be like, well, see what you get, motherfucker. Yeah, so. And back then, people were justifying what they were doing then as well. But we can't understand it, can we? Fucking bitches. Anyway, subscribe. Subscribe to this. Thumbs up, comment. And I'll see you in the next episode. I'm going to try to put all this shit into a playlist. So if you want to pick out a particular part of history or a topic, there's a playlist there, right? Until I get banned from YouTube, then I'm going to be on Spotify. There won't be no fucking playlist. It is what it is. Adios.